I don't get... Good evening and welcome to the Emotional Awareness live discussion on a Tuesday, 7 p.m. every week. We do this, and I bring you a new guest every week. Sometimes I bring you a repeat guest because sometimes we just haven't quite finished a conversation and we want to finish off. But tonight I have with me Graham Frost, who is going to be talking about heart-shaped decisions, and I've been really looking forward to this one because we cancelled a few weeks ago when I wasn't well, so thank you for rescheduling, Graham. It's great to have you on the show. Thank you.
You're most welcome. I'm glad to see you're back up and running and doing your valuable work again.
Thank you. Yeah, don't know about the valuable work bit happening yet. Working towards it, but yeah, thank you. Definitely back up and running just about at the moment. It's been a funny time the last month, but we're getting there. But thank you. And so it's great to have you on here. And we've got somebody watching, so welcome. If anybody wants to say hi and pop something in the comments, we'll pop it up and say hello back. We always like a nice two-way conversation going on in here. Yes. So. Heart-shaped decisions. Would you perhaps start by introducing a little bit about yourself and tell us how that's led to heart-shaped decisions, what that means for you?
Yes, thank you, Kay. Well, heart-shaped decisions was actually something like a concept, I suppose, that I came up with about 2 years ago. And, the story of my life is really based around heart-shaped decisions because... Hi, good evening.
Yes, we've and Karen. Hi, nice to see you both.
So what happened? Basically, to give you a really brief introduction to my early life, which is what I speak about when I do talks and what have you. I was born into a very strict church in the mid-1950s, and so I grew up in the sort of 1960s. We weren't allowed to have radio, television, recorded music, play competitive sports. As I went to school, I wasn't allowed to really have friends at school. All my friends had to come from within the church, and that, in practice, actually meant that it was my family. And so it was okay. I wasn't sort of mistreated. Well, I was mistreated, but I didn't. I've met people that had far worse starts to life than I did. We had food on the table, we had beds to sleep in. I don't ever remember going hungry or anything like that. And my dad worked, and my mum was a homemaker, and I ended up with 5 siblings. Over 16 years, my parents had 6 children. My youngest brother is 16 years younger than me. But then it was kind of very rules-based environment, and you were told that if you stuck to the rules, you would go to heaven when you died. And it didn't really seem to matter very much what happened while you were here, as long as you stuck to the rules.
Goodness, yeah.
And so when I was about 9 years old, in fact, I wasn't about 9 years old, I was exactly 9 years old, and I was going to school in Chelmsford in Essex, where I was born.
Yeah.
And I used to walk to school with a young girl that lived at the bottom of our road, and she wasn't from our church. But we became quite friendly. And I used to wait for her. We'd walk to school. It was about 20 minutes walk, and we'd walk home together. We did that for 2 or 3 weeks, and we got on quite well. And one day she said to me, "Graham, would you like to come round to my house for tea one night?" And I said, "Yes, I would, but I'd have to ask my parents because we were actually banned from going to other people's houses."
Oh, wow. Oh, goodness.
And I thought, I wonder if Mum and Dad might let me go because, they might do. So, that night we were sitting around the table having our tea, and I said to Mum, "Would it be all right if I went to Stephanie's house for tea one night?" And my dad just looked at me and he said, "We can't do that." And there was absolutely no room for manoeuvre with it at all. So the next day we walked to school, and she said, "Oh, what did your parents say?" And I said, "My dad said no, I can't come to your house for tea." And she was quite taken aback by that at that age because and she thought that I thought there was something wrong with her. I think I couldn't get it across to her. I didn't really understand why I couldn't come.
No.
At that age. But then I lost a friend, and she didn't really want to talk to me anymore after that. And I was
Oh,
like,
that's sad. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so I was, I started to question the whole thing, the whole way I was being brought up in this very strict regime. It's supposed to be a Christian church,
Oh
and
goodness.
but I carried on, and I carried on going to school, the same school, and then when I was 11 years old, I went to secondary school. I failed my 11 plus, so I went to a comprehensive school that was right across the other side of the town from where we
Okay.
lived. And but the good thing was there were no other members of our church that went there because the
Okay.
plan was for me to pass my 11 plus and go to the grammar school in Chelmsford, which is still there, quite a posh grammar school, which is where all my cousins went. And so
Okay.
I would have been at school with my cousins, but I failed my 11 plus, so I went to a comprehensive school. And I was actually quite pleased because it meant that I had a little bit of freedom because there was nobody I knew at that school from the church. So I could go and sort of be a little bit of a rebel, I was beginning to
Okay.
be
Yeah.
a little bit of a rebel by that point. And what happened was after not very long at that church, at that school, I got friendly with one of the lads that went to that school, and we used to go off on our bike. Because everyone used to ride bikes. This is in the time about 1967. Yeah, 1967. I used to ride to school on my bike. It was like probably about 3 miles to school. I used to ride
Oh
there
goodness.
every day. And so we go on. Me and this guy would go off on our bikes after school for half an hour, and my mum wasn't unduly worried by the fact that I wasn't coming straight home. Um, and to cut a long story short, one day we ended up riding into town, going into Woolworths, which was, the every
Oh yeah.
town, every town
The
should have
entertainment
Woolworths.
centre. Yeah.
Yeah, and went in
Yeah.
there, and we actually stole some sweets and
Oh.
stole some sweets. Unfortunately, we managed to get arrested
Okay.
for shoplifting in Woolworths. So of course that was a complete, there was, if you can imagine the
Mm.
consternation that caused in my family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I had these five male cousins who lived about a mile and a half from us, and they were my friends as well as my cousins. I didn't really have any other friends because I wasn't allowed to have friends apart from people in the church and the family.
Mm.
And when I got arrested, and I did actually go to court and get put on probation at the age of 11 for stealing from Wolves, believe it or not.
Oh goodness. Yeah.
That probably wouldn't happen today. It wouldn't be dealt with in the same way. But
No.
my aunt, who was my dad's sister, told her sons, yeah, she said, you better not invite Graham round anymore because he's a bad influence.
Mm.
So I lost that sort of social setting, and I began to think to myself, this is supposed to be, people talk about, God being love and all this kind of thing, and
Mm.
what's that all about then?
Yeah.
Nobody's actually showing me any love at all. In
No.
fact,
No.
I've discussed this with other people who were brought up in the same church, and one of the things that most of us agree on is that there's actually no love in that whole regime at all.
No.
Um,
No.
and we were actually follow the rules, and you'll go to heaven when you die. And don't ask questions, just do as you're told. And I
Yeah.
know a lot of people were brought up, do as you're told and all that kind of thing. But this was
Yeah.
this was extreme, you
Yeah.
know.
It's like using the fear of God to instill discipline, but
Yes,
without the love, without the explanation why, without a full understanding, and it's yeah, and it's more like an entrapment than a
absolutely.
love, isn't it? Yeah.
That is exactly what it was because you had to follow this
Yeah.
path. The idea was that you went to school and there was no value put on educational qualification
Mm.
at all. I was never asked if I'd done my homework or anything like that. I did the homework that I liked. So I always did my English homework because I liked English,
Yeah.
and I got a very good English O level. But I never got any others because it was my parents never said to me, "Have you done your homework?" They were
Yeah.
more interested in dragging me off to the church meetings, which actually happened
Yeah.
every evening.
Every evening?
Every evening we would go off.
Wow.
Once you got to the age of about 10, you were expected to go to the evening meetings, and then that was 5 nights a week, and then you would go about 4 times to church on a Sunday as well.
Crikey, that's a
So,
lot.
so you
Yeah.
didn't have any time really
So
to
that
do.
was more important than education to them.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, the
Goodness
way
me.
they
So
looked at it,
is that how your parents were both raised as well? Is that what they'd grown up to?
yes, they were born into it, yes, but
Yeah. So they didn't know any different. Yeah.
well, it got stricter as as time wore on. I mean,
Yeah.
I can remember rules being introduced where we had to we weren't allowed to go on holiday. So we used to go down to Devon to my mother's family on holiday every summer. Then my dad's factory closed down for 2 weeks. We would go down, excuse me, to Devon, and we had to stop doing that because we were told that that's not. We had to just
Wow.
stay at home and go out to the seaside for days. You were just about allowed to
Hmm.
do that.
Yeah.
Well, and things like that, and it just got stricter. We had to, we weren't allowed to have pets. One day, the leader, the international
Yeah.
leader of the church, woke up one morning and said, "I don't know what I'll do. I'll say that nobody's allowed to have pets anymore. So we
Mm.
had to have our dog put down and things like that, And
Oh goodness.
yes, I know. It's just crazy when you think about it. But I mean,
Yeah, and like you said, you didn't see it as abuse. You saw it as the way your family lived. So it just to you,
yeah,
it was the norm in your family,
absolutely.
and and yet it's like easy to say that your parents didn't. I sort of said that a moment ago. They didn't know any different, but actually, your parents did know different. Because if they didn't think there was anything other than that, they wouldn't have stopped you seeing other friends. So they
Yeah,
were aware that there were different lifestyles, different people, and that what they did was different. And that's why they sort of almost suppressed you into that lifestyle to prevent you seeing the other options, isn't it?
oh,
So it's
absolutely. I
it's
mean, yes,
yeah,
but they chose their way of life, and they also chose to, if you like, inflict it on their
yeah,
children. All their 6 children were brought up in it. And
yeah,
in actual fact, over time, my 2 brothers and I have all left it, and my
mm,
2 sisters remain in it. But
yeah,
that took many years to happen. But so I
yeah,
began to it was all for me. It was all about how I felt.
yeah.
Um,
So
and
it's
I,
not about being against religion or against church or against your parents specifically, but it's about the way that was sort of indoctrinated into you, as opposed to it's supposed to being a choice and done with love. It was just like you were put into a fear of it and told this is the only way and that sort of thing.
yes,
And I think
yeah,
the harm from that probably came not so much then, but when you reflect on it later and you realise the options and what you'd missed out on, is that
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
where it all kicks in.
Absolutely. I mean, we were actually told that we would go.
Oh
If
bless.
we didn't do what we
Yeah,
were supposed to be doing,
yeah.
um,
Someone's put, I pray every parent has the wisdom to always pay attention to their mental health. Sorry, but if you looking for going from Facebook, if you want your name to show, you just have to give StreamYard permission for it to see. Otherwise, we'll just see you as Facebook user. But if you're happy with that, then we're fine to keep going with that. So yeah, It's sorry, I lost the plot there now.
that's all right.
Sorry, do carry on, Graham. You're right. Yeah.
No, that happened, and then I began to feel, I thought there must be something else. I could see the other people that I went to school with, and they were okay people. I went to it was quite a nice school in Chelmsford, and
Mm.
then my dad got a job in London. When I'd been at secondary school for about probably 18 months or so, my dad got a job in London, and within about a year or so of getting that job, he decided that he was going to move the family to London. So in actual fact, we went the opposite direction to what everybody else was doing. People were leaving London and moving to Essex. We went from Essex into London.
All
Uh,
right.
I often think if we hadn't done that, would I have stayed? And because the Chelmsford church gathering, if you like, it's an international church, but it was
Mm.
quite a small gathering of people, about 30 people. Then I went to London. I went to this massive school in London, which was full of lots of, even in those days, full of
Mm.
different cultures, of black people and Asian people and all sorts of London's always
Yeah.
been a melting pot of people. Um, and I realised that, I wasn't the only person that was a bit different. And I thought, oh,
Mm.
this is okay. I'm actually very glad we did move to London. And
Yeah.
I completed my education in that school. And, by the time I left school, I was probably really starting to rebel a little bit more than,
Mm.
I really thought, but I hadn't really thought about escaping from it because I thought, well, where would I go? What would I do? Because I'd
Yeah.
heard of people who had left. In fact,
Yeah.
one of my much older cousins had left, and he was never spoken about again. And it was like he didn't exist. Um,
Goodness.
and I thought,
Yeah.
is that what I want? And then I left school when I was 16. I got my 1 O level and I left school at 16
Bless. Yeah.
and got a job. I got a job in an office
Yeah.
in Shoreditch, which is on the borders of the East End of London and the City of London. And that was probably the making of me because I went to work. Went to work in a company where there were no other members of the church, and
Mm.
they were actually nice people. Looking back on the people I worked with in the office, they treated me like I was one of them. I wasn't I wasn't supposed to
Yeah.
eat my lunch with them because we weren't supposed to eat with people who weren't in the church. Um, but after a few weeks, I thought, well, nobody will know, so I'm just going to eat my lunch with these people and sit in the
Yeah.
office and have my sandwiches with everybody else, and nothing happened to me. I wasn't struck down by a bolt of lightning, and I wasn't run over by a bus.
Uh,
And then after a few months, they said to me, we go to the pub on a Friday lunchtime. I don't know if you can remember the days when people used to go to the pub from the office on a Friday lunchtime, and
yeah.
they would come back and not a whole lot of work would get done on Friday afternoon.
Yeah. That was pretty much a British culture at the time, wasn't
Yeah,
it? Like a whole country thing.
yeah, this is the sort of thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, the pub was absolutely packed on a Friday lunchtime.
Mm. That was probably
We,
slightly just before I started working, and it sort of stopped shortly after that. But yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I
But
went.
it sounds amazing listening because it sounds like you've grown up with this extremely strict environment, a lot of influence around you from a lot of family,
Mm,
very little influence from outside because you were shielded from it, and
yeah,
yet, despite all of that, you have naturally chosen to do what every child would do without that influence. Is you've naturally followed an open heart and an open mind, and realised that not everybody that influences you is correct with their influences or are the influences that you choose to receive, and that you've had the courage to follow your own heart and your own mind, and that is really powerful, and it's so vulnerable what you've shared tonight as well, and that's really powerful.
yeah. Thank you.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so how has this led into heart-shaped decisions and what you do now is sort of bit in between this.
Right. So yes. Well, so
Yeah.
I eventually, after at the age of 17, I did actually make what I considered to be my first heart-shaped decision, which actually was, it took me from the age of 9 to 17. It took me eight years to make that first decision, based purely on feelings, to actually leave my family. And I left my family home at the age of 17, walked down the road from my parents' house. And when I do my talks, I talk about my parents were walking along behind me,
Okay.
and in fact they were both in tears. My mum and dad were both crying, and
Yeah.
they were in their 40s at the time. I was 17, and
Mm.
I looked around. I thought, I've got to keep going. I've made the decision that this feels right for me to go and start my own life again. To start. I'll
Yeah.
say jokingly that I take 17 years off my age because my real life started 17 years later than I was actually born.
Mm.
And I didn't see my mother after that day I left home in 1973. I didn't see my mother for 27 years.
Oh goodness. Yeah.
Um,
That's.
but it was I have, and I made a lot of mistakes. I mean, by the time I was 19,
Mm.
I was in a young offenders institution because I fell into bad ways, and the heart-shaped decision I went there was making the decision not to go, not to carry on with a life of petty crime and to actually do something more, constructive and positive in my life.
Yeah.
And then when I was 22, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer.
Oh goodness, that's really young. Yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, it was, and I just had to, I thought, well, I remember being told I had cancer, and I was like, well, nothing else has got me. This isn't going to, and
No.
I focused on what was in front of me. At the time I was with somebody, I was in a
Wow.
relationship with somebody that I was happy with, and I thought that was going to, I thought we were going to be together for the rest of our lives. In fact, we weren't. But
Yeah.
you always got to focus on what's in front of you, not what's behind you. And
Yeah.
that's the, because yes, you learn the lessons from what you've done, but you don't stay in the past. And that's
Mm.
a big thing for me, is making sure that you're in the present and the future rather than the past.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the heart shape, I mean, other heart shape decisions I've made in my life would be, actually, I got married when I was in my 30s. The heart shaped
Okay.
decision wasn't to get married. The heart shaped decision was to leave that marriage after a few years because I was very unhappy. I thought I've
Okay.
got myself
Mm.
into a situation where I'm not happy, where where I
Yeah.
don't want to stay in this situation. I don't think, I don't think you can actually start again too many times.
No.
I think,
Okay.
I'm not saying, if you're starting again every week, it would be a problem, but, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I've had lots of fresh starts in my life based on feelings. Even until the heart
Mm.
decision I made coming
Yeah.
up for 2 years ago was to move from somewhere where I'd lived for 27 years to a completely new place
Mm.
because I wanted to be closer to my current partner.
Oh
Um,
wow.
and I'm actually very happy here, and I love where I live now. And
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by greenery, and I love the outdoors, and I have to get out and every day. And I think that's what's kept me sane during coronavirus, because everything that I was used to doing work-wise disappeared overnight when the lockdown started. So because most of my work is face to face with people, I had to adapt myself to a completely different environment, and that had to be a heart stretch. So I thought, what do I do? Do I carry
Yeah.
on doing what I'm doing, or because I've got such a passion for helping other people to make these heart-shaped decisions based on how you feel. Um,
Mm.
I really think it's important to get that message, particularly to young people.
Yeah. Yeah, it is because, as I said, for a lot of young people, we're not telling them to suddenly ignore everything the parents say and leave
Yeah.
home, but certainly to pay attention to their emotions and feelings and talk them through. And
Mm.
I think that's the important thing, is not running away necessarily, but making it clear how they feel, and that they are their own human being,
Yeah.
entitled
Yeah.
to have their own views. And I think that's where religion and culture are great when people come together,
Mm.
but when somebody does feel like it doesn't fit who they are, it not only alienates them from the culture, but it is from their family as well, and religion, and that's where family problems come in, and we end up with children and teenagers who are homeless and living on the streets and then getting in with all the wrong crowds, because those cultural and religious values can override family values of sticking together and supporting each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite important for parents to realise that sometimes you have to put family values ahead and keep your family safe first. And it's a hard one for a lot of parents. It's a very difficult one, and I know not all parents have that ability to manage their own emotions in those situations, let alone those of a teenager.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very very difficult, and they do what they think they're doing by trying to like make life rigid, and they follow this route and don't diverge from it. And then when one of their youngsters or one of their children do diverge, they've got such a rigid mindset they can't follow that, and then that's where you end up with these split families, and it's sad
Yeah.
to see. And it is so preventable with a little bit more of an open mind and an open heart. It's so preventable. And for other parents who've got teenagers going through what you've been through, I'd like for them to be taking this on board, and realizing that sometimes you do have to put your children ahead, and think about keeping them safe in the long run, and keep loving them. And one of the best quotes I ever heard years ago, I can't even think who said it now, but somebody said, at the time your children seem the least lovable is the time they need loving the most.
Yes,
And
yeah.
to me, that's where in those moments, like you say, you go and do sort of petty crime and a bit of shoplifting and that, those are the times when you probably felt that you really needed your parents to be there for you, but they were probably against you rather than for you at that moment, even more than ever.
Well, I
Um,
think yes. I mean, yeah, it was always about them. There was
yeah,
there was another instance that happened not very long after that when I was still 11, I think, and we'd just been told that we weren't allowed. We recently, because all these new rules kept coming out at that point in time, in the 60s, and one of the rules, this new rule came out. We weren't allowed to go shopping on a Saturday, so Saturday had to be clear for I don't know what it was. There was some this guy just had nothing better to do than just make up a whole load of rules to make people's lives miserable. I think.
yeah,
But of course, people followed it because they were kind of brainwashed into it in a way.
yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
I've actually been out. I went out shopping, and about 2 weeks after this new rule came out, I thought I can't remember what I went to buy, but I went on my bike. I used to go everywhere on my bike, and I went to a shop and bought something on a Saturday. And I was riding my bike home, and the car came along behind me and made me jump out of my skin nearly. And I had a carrier bag over the handlebars, and I fell off my bike and I smashed my left wrist on the curb,
Ooh,
um, and actually broke my left wrist to the point where I hope nobody's too squeamish that's watching, but the bones actually came through the skin.
oh goodness, yeah,
But
open fracture, yeah.
fortunately, it was right outside the local hospital. So
Okay,
I've gone into the hospital. I pushed my bike into the hospital. I walked into the casualty department of the hospital, and I walked up to the nurse. I said, "I think I've broken my wrist." And she looked at me. She said, "I think you have. You better come in and sit down." And we didn't even have a phone in our house. We had it was in the days when people still used to go and use phone boxes down the street.
oh yeah, I
Um,
remember them.
and we didn't have a
Yeah,
house phone, so I said, look, I'm Graham Frost, and I live at such and such an address, and
yeah,
they had to send the police round to my parents' house to tell them I'd had an accident. Could they please come down to the hospital and pick me up?
yeah.
And do you know all I got from my dad and my mum? There was no love whatsoever. It was that's judgment on you for going shopping on a Saturday.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I remember going to bed
yeah,
that night. I was 11 years old. I was actually crying with the pain of my broken wrist. It was in
yeah.
plaster, but it was still
And no
broken.
sympathy, yeah.
No sympathy whatsoever, none. And I
Yeah,
always thought to myself, that was what I had grown up to expect.
yeah.
And there was
Almost makes you wonder how they connected with each other enough to have 6 children.
well,
But yes, yeah,
I've had this conversation with my middle brother. In fact, both my brothers I've had conversation with over the last few years since they left. And
yeah,
I don't think it was just the church that was complete. I think there were some families that did actually have love, but unfortunately ours didn't,
yeah.
because
No.
my mother had mental health problems that came from adverse childhood experiences that she'd had,
Okay, right, yeah,
and I
yeah.
don't. And my dad. I found out many years later. Was actually my dad was told by his mum in front of his future wife, uh, my mother, that he would never amount to anything.
Yeah,
So I don't think either of them had the greatest amount of self-esteem. They probably haven't grown up knowing
yeah.
what love was themselves very much.
No.
So because nobody actually gets like that on their own.
No. No, like
You
I said,
know,
children are born with an open mind and open heart, and it's only
mm,
through experience that closes them off.
yeah,
Through lessons that they learn, not necessarily educational lessons from school, or sometimes even that can go wrong. But yeah,
mm,
it's through religion and culture and families that children learn to judge and be opinionated and biased towards each other, and that's where a lot of bullying comes from as well. Because children learn it from their families, and it's sad. I know sometimes some children can just naturally have this tendency to be very, very loud and boisterous and open with
mm,
questions, and it can come across as bullying.
yeah,
Um, and some children naturally have this almost aggressive tendency to them. But again, there's always an influence somewhere. Not all children are born sweet and cuddly. I do get that. They sort of, that they all have different chemistry,
mm,
and some children naturally are not going to be as cuddly as others and as sweet as others. But there is always a massive influence, and especially that first few years of their life. There's always some massive influences, but that's quite a journey to go through, though.
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know any different. So it kind of, I don't,
yeah,
I just think. But then, what happened was, I didn't actually talk about this at all. For many, many years. I eventually
yeah,
found myself working on the railway. Which, we've discussed that offline earlier because
yeah,
you've
yeah.
got railway connections with your family, and
Yes, yes,
I found myself working on the railway, and that was because my girlfriend, who I was with when I got diagnosed with cancer, um,
okay.
she told me to get. She said, "Why don't you get a proper job?" Because I used to work in hospitality. I had sort of jobs that they sort of lasted a few months here and there, and I mean there's lots of people helped me actually as well because I was actually homeless at one point, and an Irish couple made the heart-shaped decision to offer me a job when I walked into their pub off the street. Um, and
Yeah,
I'm still in touch with that lady to this day. And I don't know where I
oh
would have.
wow.
Sometimes you need somebody else to make a heart-shaped decision to help you.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, yeah. No,
yeah,
we do need support with that sometimes as well. Yeah, Karen just saying sorry. They're driving through the mountains. They lost signal for a bit. She's going to catch it on replay. So bless her. They're over in Arkansas in America, so
oh wow,
obviously got slightly
how
rougher terrain than we've got over here. So yeah,
yeah, yeah. No, I've never
um,
been to that part of America, but I can imagine
no.
you wouldn't get a very good signal there, I wouldn't imagine. No.
No, no. So you're saying the railway? You down in Kent. You were on the railway. Which railway did you work on? You're say
No,
from London.
I was on the East Coast Main Line that goes from London to Edinburgh, Glasgow,
Okay, main line.
from
Okay,
King's
yeah.
Cross. Yeah, and I've got a job there in the old restaurant cars because I work in
Ah,
working in hospitality, and I just applied for a job on the railway,
yeah,
I just wrote a letter and said, "Have you got any jobs?" And in those days, there was no CVs or anything like that. I wrote them a
yeah.
letter, and I got a reply back, and they said, "Can you attend an interview?" And I went for an interview there in October 1978, and started work there in January 1979.
Wow. It's
Uh,
interesting because obviously the viewers, I've never spoken about that side of my family with the viewers, but yeah, my grandfather worked on the North Kent Railway,
mm,
so somewhere in the London zone, you were probably pretty close to each other at times, in the London stations. But he was Dartford, Slade Green, but then he worked all the
right.
way along to sort of Herne Bay area, Margate, Ramsgate. He did all along there.
Mm,
And so yeah, my grandmother used to get on the train at Slade Green, come down to Gillingham, pick up myself, my cousin, sometimes both of us or one of us, and then she'd
yeah.
take us along to Margate, Ramsgate, and somewhere for the day on the beach and back again. So that was sort of my childhood, riding along the trains with my grandmother. And so yeah, I
Yeah,
used to love that. Yeah, but then when I was 9, we then moved away. We moved up to Lincolnshire. But
right.
on my father's side, there's railway connections there as well because my father's, I don't know if it's grandfather, great grandfather. It goes back away. I think his grandfather, great grandfather, and even before that, were
Mm.
all station masters up in Lincolnshire.
Oh wow.
And I got to think of the name of it now. It was just outside Gainsborough. somewhere just outside Gainsborough. I can't think of the
Well,
name of
I
it.
know that area a little bit, but yeah, I can't think of the little places around there.
I thought it starts with an L, but I could probably totally wrong. But yeah, so there's I've got family history on both sides of my parents' family, my mum's and my dad's side, that are both connected to railway. So I've got a very strong connection with railway history in that sense. But I didn't know about the Lincolnshire side until a few years back.
Okay, that's
And
interesting. No,
yeah,
I've got absolutely none, as far as I know, absolutely none of my family on either side ever worked for the railway apart from me.
yeah, yeah.
So
No,
I've
I
got,
haven't. Nobody has since, but
mm,
I would have done. But I don't live anywhere near a railway now, so
no, I had,
I've got to drive 20 miles if I even want to get on a train now.
no, so
So
I had 24 mostly enjoyable years there, to be honest. Yeah, it was,
yeah,
I won't say it was all fantastic, but no, that was what got me into really what I do now to a certain extent, because I was working away on the trains, 17 years, and
mm,
got to the point where I was actually, running the customer service team. I was
wow,
the chief steward, so I've done that for
yeah,
a few years, and it was
yeah,
hard work, very physical work, and a lot of people came to work there thinking it was going to be like working on aeroplanes, but it's nothing like
mm,
that at all. It's much more physical. Um,
yeah,
and and then one day, the chief executive of the company who I worked for came up to me and said, could I have?" And this is another heart-shaped decision that he made. And funnily enough, at the moment, I'm trying to contact him to interview him because I have
all right,
because I'm in contact with somebody that knows him, and trying to get
mm,
to an interview with him because he's in his 70s now and retired. But he was the man who gave me the chance to get in. Because if you'd said to me 25, 30 years ago that I would ever deliver training or even become a professional speaker and tell my story, I would have said not a chance, absolutely no
mm,
way, because I was actually quite a shy and retiring person, and I'm an introvert who pretends to be an extrovert, and he said to me, I've watched I've seen what you do, how you are with your team, and would you be interested in having a job in training other people to do what you do? And I
mm,
said to him, I said, does that mean I've got to get up and speak in front of people? And he said, well, yes, it does. He said, but we can give you that skill. He said, what we can't do is duplicate the experience that you've got.
yeah, mm,
So he said, will you apply for the job? And I did,
yeah,
and I got it. And I spent 7 really enjoyable years, 1996 until 2003, delivering training to, railway staff and managers and team leaders, and
yeah,
had, just like a completely different direction to what I
mm,
ever thought I would go in.
yeah,
Because somebody saw something in me and
mm,
offered me an opportunity, and so I always say, somebody offers you an opportunity, say yes, even if you're scared.
yeah. And what they saw in you was more than just your experience. It was that personality that had been in you right since you wanted to go for tea with that friend at 9 years old.
Yeah,
It
probably.
was that open personality that you had even then. That's what's still in you, and that's what people see. They might not vocalize that in that term, but that's what's gained you the experience you've got. That like you said, just being open with everybody, being accepting of everybody, and having that open mind. That's incredible. But yeah, no, what an amazing career on the back of one O level. That was quite an
Oh, exactly.
achievement. You were saying earlier.
Especially today, the day we're actually
Yeah.
talking here, and it's the day that all the A level results have come out. My social media,
Yeah.
I've got a lot of schools and teachers on my social media because I work in schools, and so it's all been about the A
Yes.
level today. And I'm just thinking about, oh, how wonderful it is. They've got their, they're going to university. I'm just thinking of how are the young people feeling who haven't done so well.
Yeah.
Who's
Yeah.
concentrating on them? Because I was one of the ones that didn't do so well at school.
That's
Um, And you
Good
know,
point, because we cancelled the other week and it didn't even occur to me because because obviously we haven't even covered that, but yet we're now working in schools a lot with young people.
yeah,
Is actually today's a really good day to do this conversation and inspire those people. So if anybody's watching this live or on replay later and think this could inspire somebody when they haven't had the results they want, share it, because it's not about what you've got on piece of paper, it's about who you are in your heart. That
absolutely.
goes
Yeah,
a lot
yeah.
further, a lot further.
Yeah, I'm not
So
saying, I mean,
yes.
I talk to young people in schools. I'm, thankfully getting back to doing a bit of that now that we're allowed to go
Yeah.
into schools again. And I say to them, I'm not saying to you don't work hard at school. I'm saying to you, you have to make the heart shape. Yes, you are going to have to make a heart shape decision sometimes to do things at school that you think, well, what good's that going to be to me? And because you
Mm.
know, things are a little bit different now to what they were, when I was going to school. And you probably do need to have some kind of qualifications, unless you're going to go and work for yourself or your family or something like that. But at the same
Mm.
time, and of course, the other thing about schools now, which is very different to my day, and I always say this, is that I didn't have anybody to talk to at school.
No.
In my day, you had a head teacher, a deputy head, and a form teacher. I think, but to be honest, I never felt there was probably maybe two or three teachers throughout my time at school that I
Mm.
felt were really interested in me as a person.
Yeah.
Um, I
Yeah.
think there's a lot more pastoral care in schools now, and
Yeah.
you have got somebody to go and talk to if you're not happy at home. I always say to young people, for goodness sake, if you're 16 or 17 and you're thinking about running away from home, you probably don't have to do what I did because there are people that you
Yeah.
can talk to now. I didn't have
Yeah.
that, you know.
Well, not just school, but helplines as well. So if you can't
Yeah,
speak to somebody at school, there are helplines. And
there was nothing in the
yeah,
early 1970s. If there was anything, I was completely unaware of it. I
yeah.
don't think there was anything really. I mean, I'm not, I think
No, I wouldn't back then. No, I think
it's,
that was before the days of
so
Esther
much.
Ransom, wasn't it, when she opened Childline?
Yeah, so that was yeah,
Because
that was
she did some amazing work. I mean, she was a comedian back then. Sort of
yeah,
her Childline work came later. I sort of remember
yeah,
seeing all that
absolutely.
evolve and develop, and she did
Mm.
some incredible work over the years. To bring that all about. But yeah, there are, obviously wherever anybody's watching from, there's always, you can look up, and most kids these days have got access to a smartphone or a friend with a smartphone where they
Yeah,
can look something up and find a phone number and make that call when they're away from the parents. So when they're at school on break or something, or somewhere quiet on the way home before they get home.
mm,
If they really feel like they can't talk in front of parents, start by talking to school.
yeah,
And if they really feel they're not getting listened to at school, don't give up, because somebody will listen. Keep trying. There's youth groups, and these days, although we're going back to the conversation with you and church, these days there are sometimes places where they can go to church and ask for support as well. So although your story was negative on the back of that sort of church experience, that doesn't have to be that way for everybody as well. So there's
no,
always a way to talk things through. And it's like, for me as well, my point of view is from the parent side of this, if things are getting stressful with a teenager, is parents also can make really good mentors if the parents have a little bit of support. And that's what my book is about, is
yeah,
about supporting the parents through reconnecting with their teenagers, which obviously when your parents and you were having separation issues, having issues, when I was having struggles with my son, this I didn't have the manual for my son. I had to write my own. So
yeah.
it was there's so many different ways to get support now. So many different ways, and social media is just like there at the drop of a hat, and there's so many people out that can help. So many people.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's very,
yeah,
very different world now. I actually did
yeah,
feel very alone. But I don't feel alone now. Even though I'm on my own in the house at the minute. I'm surrounded by people who I can talk to. And yeah,
yeah,
but it wasn't always like that for me. But I'm very thankful and grateful that it is now.
yeah. No, like yourself, I was very much the same. I had one form tutor and one other tutor I could speak to, but my form tutor in particular, I was very fortunate I did connect with her. Like the first year I joined high school, and she was there for me all the way through. And I did struggle through school, and especially having moved twice. I moved to Norfolk 3 days before starting high school, so I walked in knowing nobody. I was the complete stranger in the class. And the first day at high school, because I was the complete stranger, everybody sat down and I was the one child sat in the corner on the back row on my own. Nobody wanted to sit near me because nobody knew me. And then the first day, there's always one child who misbehaves. And as a punishment, he got moved away from his friend and told to sit next to me. So that was my first encounter of making a friend at school, was the naughty boy getting told to come and sit next to me. I got on great with him for the rest of school, but it was, because again, I was open-minded, I was just like accepted people for who they were. But that was my first day of high school. Wasn't the best experience, but and not were many days. But I had a form tutor in particular who was not the same teacher that did that. But yeah, that was a maths teacher. I never did like maths anyway.
Well, normally maths was never my. I never, I can add up and subtract and divide and multiply. That's about it. I never really saw the point of the rest of it. But
I can do them as long as I've got a pen and paper or a calculator, but I can't do any of it in my head.
no, but it's similar to me. But it's interesting. When I think back to my school days, there's a few people, very, very few teachers, primary school teachers that stand out for me. And then when I went to school in London, I didn't like, at that time in my life, I didn't like PE. Because you had to go, and we actually had to go on a coach all the way to the outskirts of the East End of London, to a place where you had to run. I didn't like exercise, to be quite honest with you, at all. I did everything I could to try and get out of PE. But there was, So there was one person in that school who came back to me, comparatively recently, really, and. In the end, they actually accepted the fact that Graham Frost is not going to go to PE. So, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with him when he should be at PE twice a week or whatever it was? So they came up with the idea and said, well, he liked being. I was always in the library. Until there was a free period, I was in the library. I was a real bookworm. And the lady who ran the library, the librarian, was Miss Martin. She was a young woman, probably in her late 20s, I would imagine, and she kind of took me under her wing a little bit, and she gave me things to do. So I would go to the library and I would say, okay, so I'm supposed to be at PE today, Miss Martin. What would you like me to do? And she used to get me to put, stamp up the books and unpack the new books and put them on the shelves and things like that. And actually made me feel useful. And I think that was a heart-shaped decision that she made, because she saw somebody. She thought, I don't know what I can do for him, but I can make him feel useful, and that's what she did. And I'm
brilliant.
Very thankful for that, because I don't know what I would have done. I would have, I was and still am an avid reader. I love to get my nose into a book, and my parents always used to say to me, "Oh, you've always got your nose in a book." Well, that was my escape from the actual reality.
There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
No, absolutely. I say to young people now, if you like reading, I would encourage you to read rather than, certainly rather than spend a lot of time glued to a computer screen or a phone screen. Pick up a book and read it, because you'll always learn something if you read a book.
Yeah. See, that's funny. My dad brought me up on the basis, if you can read a book, you can do anything. I could read the book, but I still never understand things enough to actually do the things that were in the book. But I give it a go. But my dad was okay. My dad was quite good with reading and maths on a sort of basic level. But my dad's complete opposite to you, in that he avoided all of his other lessons, and the only one he would go to was PE. That was his favourite, and that's the only certificate he left school with, as far as I remember, was a PE certificate. That was his favourite. He loved doing all the gymnastics and the trampoline and everything. He was quite athletic when he was younger, and
I'm
He
much
always
more.
watches these on replay, so he's got a mention tonight.
Okay, no, I'm much more athletic now. Funnily enough,
Yeah,
I go out for a walk. I have an app on my phone that counts my steps, and I try and do 10,000
yeah,
steps every day, and sometimes
mm,
more. I'm very, very sort of active, and because I know that the benefits of exercise now. But at that point in my life, it was just cross country running. I don't want to run anywhere. I don't want to do
yeah,
that. I don't want to be running up and down ladders, and I didn't like heights, so I didn't like I didn't
yeah.
particularly like playing team sports. And I've developed a great love of cricket in my life, but watching it, not playing it.
Yeah. No, you were saying about growing up with fear with parents. Our fear growing up. My dad's same height as me, about 5'6", but I've got quite square hands for a woman. My hands are quite broad.
Yeah.
My dad's hands are exactly the same length as mine, but they are an inch wider.
Oh, right. Okay.
That was enough to make us behave when we were little.
Yes. Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
That was all we had to worry about. Was dad's hands were huge.
Well, funnily enough, I mean,
Yeah.
at a time when sort of corporal punishment was the norm. I mean,
Yeah.
I've actually been on Facebook page for my old school in London. It's no longer there, but I've made
Mm,
contact over the last year or so with having time on our hands with lockdown and everything. I thought, oh, I'll go to the Facebook page for my old school in the East End of London, and there was. And guess what? There
yeah.
were a few people on there that remember me, and
Oh wow.
the
Yeah.
amount of people that said they got caned while over there. I never
Yeah.
got. I was there for three
Yeah.
years, never got caned at all.
Yeah, and you think to say things are so different now to when you and I would have been at school, and even though I was a
No.
bit later than you, but I had different experiences because growing up in Gillingham, I had 9 years at school where I never even saw children get in a fight. Not 9 years, but until I was 9,
Hmm.
I went to a school where I never even saw children get in a fight or argue. I never saw children getting punished.
Wow.
It was just a school where everybody just seemed happy. I loved school. There was only once where I think I got called some names and a teacher told the other child off and told them to apologise to me, and it was just like that was once. So in about 4 or 5 years that I was there,
Hmm.
and then I moved up to Lincolnshire and I had a complete opposite experience. I
Wow.
got put in a class with a teacher who again must have been in her late 20s. She carried around not a wooden ruler, but the wooden bar off the back of a chair,
Wow.
and she used it on the backs of knuckles.
Really?
She did, and if it wasn't her hitting children with a wooden bar, it was dinner ladies or other teachers. I'd actually seen them dragging children by the hair into the bathroom and literally washing their mouths out with soap. And believe me, that soap was not hygienic. Not in an outdoor toilet block in the middle of the playground. That was not
Wow.
hygienic in a primary school. Um,
Wow.
the only the only day I actually saw a teacher do something that I felt they were justified for, and it did end up in a slight issue, was there was a child who really wound this teacher up, and I'd moved on to another class by now. And I remember this, we had a male teacher, and I thought he was really nice, he was really fair, he
Hmm.
was firm, but he treated all the kids decently, very different to the first teacher.
Yeah.
And I never saw him punish any of the kids, but he was always very firm and fair and kept everyone in the place. But one day there was one kid that really, really, really pushed their luck, and they just kept going and going and going.
Hmm.
And this is a really weird school because the front and the back of the school, it was like all the classrooms were in a long line,
Yeah.
just built side by side all the way along. And the front and the back of every classroom was glass panels, floor to ceiling.
Right.
So you were like sitting in a greenhouse with brick walls between each class. It was really weird.
Wow.
And he went to the back row, leant over the desk, grabbed this kid by the scruff of the t-shirt and picked him up, and his foot went backwards through the window. But that was the only time. I can't even say that was justified, but it was the one day where I saw a kid push and push and push him, but he didn't frighten me like he was out of control. Though looking at it now you probably would, but at the time it just seemed like it was normal. This kid needed like putting in the place, but they'd be like, he really
Yeah.
was pushing it. But at the same time it's like, what was going on in that kid's life for him to be behaving like that? But that was just one of those situations where it just like happened as he picked him up, his foot just went straight back through the window.
Wow.
I don't think it did any damage apart from break the window with the heel of his shoe, but But it was just one of those schools. It's like there was always something going on, and there's every single day there were kids fighting in the playground. I'd like get bullied to and from school on the way, and I had to walk through quite an obscure area. There was 2 routes I could walk home. One was quite a long way on a main route, and the other route I didn't like going because I was off the beaten track and there weren't necessarily people around. And it was, I do remember having to go up a steep hill on this sort of almost mud track past a playing field and fields and hills, and it was just like, I hated going that route, even though it was the shorter route, because I just didn't feel safe going up there. And it's really weird because the year and a half that we lived there before we moved here, I had a dog. And this dog, he was the most loving, kind, friendly dog. He was like your perfect pet dog in every way. But the year and a half that we were up there, the amount of times he would just sit and howl and howl. He hated it there as well. So it wasn't just me, and my parents weren't happy up there. I wasn't. It was like all of us. The whole atmosphere up there just seemed so different. So I'd had this really kind, loving family environment with a great school and kids. Everybody got on great. To going to this school it just felt like a school from hell. And to come out of that and then just suddenly move again 3 days for high school and be dumped in a whole new school again, it would just, it didn't make school very enjoyable for me.
No.
But I was really fortunate. Again, I just had that one amazing teacher who would listen to me through anything. She was really great.
That's great.
You know, like you say, people see something in you, and she did in me. Took me many years to see what she see in me, but you know, I knew she did. And,
that's great. I mean, I think that was the one teacher that I had was my English teacher, and that was in my last school, and his name was Fred Thomas, and I found out a bit about him recently because there was a thread on the Facebook group from the school about him, and he taught in that school for over 30 years, and everybody that wrote something about him had good memories of him, and it turned out that he actually fought in the Spanish Civil War.
Oh wow! Yeah,
and he passed away. He passed away in 1999 at a great age. You know that. But everybody, there was like 30 or 40 comments about the fact that he was probably the best. Everyone said he was the best teacher they had at that school. But to be quite honest with you, I can't remember many other teachers apart from him there. And I also found out that the head teacher of that school, when I went there, in the East End of London, was a former head teacher of an approved school.
Oh right.
It was like where they used to send naughty children.
Ah yes.
Back in the 60s and 70s, they used, if you these days they have pupil referral units and alternative provision, which is, I've actually been to some of them, I've worked in some of them, but in those days an approved school was almost sort of next to a prison. It was almost like a cross between a prison and a workhouse almost. Young people didn't fit in anywhere, they just used to get dumped into these places.
Yeah. Now when it was high school, actually, the first year I was there, we had quite an elderly headmaster, and he retired at the end of that year, and a new one came in. And in that year, I only once remember seeing somebody get the slipper from that headmaster. I happened to be walking past as he was about to do it, or as he started doing it, and I was like, typical, there's a whole school building and all the other time of the year, and I happened to walk past, he starts giving somebody a slipper. But again, I knew that was out of character him for do it. It had to have been something pretty serious, because it wasn't something I'd seen him do before. It wasn't something I'd even imagined him doing. So whatever he's doing, that person must have done something quite serious. And I know today that's not acceptable to do that. I'll read Karen's comment in a minute. But we also had a teacher who was the rural science teacher, gardening teacher, and he was a real character, and he used to walk around everywhere with a tomato cane, but he split the end of the tomato cane, and he'd walk around, he'd tap it on his hands, and because it was split, it made a noise as the ends tapped together. So he used to walk around, and everybody knew that if they stepped out of line, didn't do what they were told, they'd just get the end of that cane, but because he'd split it, it was noisier than it would sting. So it didn't get used very often, but just the threat of it being there again was enough. But it was so funny because we had this new headmaster came in, and he came in on the new ethics then, and this was literally the cusp of when they started saying, right, no more corporal punishment.
Yeah.
And I remember one day standing in a line of people outside the canteen, and this teacher standing there with his cane saying, right, anybody steps out of line and I'll get them with the cane, he said, okay. And just as he said it, the headmaster came out of the cloakroom and said, I disagree with corporate punishment. He said, well, I told them they've got the choice. If they step out of line, they're going to get it. He said, and he just like, and he said, and if you threaten me again in front of the kids, I'll do it to you and all. And he threatened the headmaster with it.
Really? Oh my word.
Yeah, but in a kind of an almost jokingly way, but a firm, like I'm not messing about way, but almost a joking way. And the headmaster sort of went bright red and walked off. It was really funny, actually.
I can imagine. I mean, you just have to think. You have to think there about.
But he was one of the most respected teachers in that school. That guy, yeah, he was, because, and I think the difference is one thing, and this is the thing I've learnt over the years, is it's one thing to make a threat. And I've seen parents who threaten the kids. You do that, I'm going to hit you. You do that, I'm going to take that away. You do that, and you're not going to be allowed to go to do that. And they make all these threats, but then they don't follow up with the threat.
Yeah.
If you make an empty threat, what is that teaching your child?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's actually teaching them that they can push your boundaries further and further and further, because you keep making threats, they keep pushing harder. So on the one hand, there is that. So I know corporal punishment's not acceptable. I know that. But again, like you say, you and I were brought up in the days before it was ruled out. So to us, it's what we knew in terms of children disciplined with corporal punishment. So even with my children, it was like if I'd said to them, and I hate saying this now, doing anything about raising teenagers, but when my children were little, again, before this day, we'd said, before smacking was ruled out, I had a rule. I'd never smack anything on the back of the hand or the back of the bum. I would never touch them anywhere else, because I had that strict rule anyway.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't do it hard, but it was if I'd said to them, I need you to do this, I'd ask them please, I'd reason with them, I'd give them a reason to do something. If I didn't, and I got to a point I had to count, if I got up to 5, what's the point in me throwing a threat at them if I didn't follow it through?
Yeah.
And I think I only ever had to do that with my daughter once. And it was really funny, because when I moved into a house just over 20 years ago, I said to my neighbour, I said, I'll have to warn you, if you ever hear my daughter scream as if she's being murdered, I said, I've counted to 1.
Oh, right.
Because all I ever had to do was threaten her enough to smack her once, and that was it. She hated it enough that after that, if she decided she was going to play up and push me and ignore and push my boundaries, 1, and that's it. She was gone. She learnt quite young, bless her. My son would always wait until I got to 4.5, and then he'd run. He learnt to count a bit more. But so I'm going to read here what Karen's put. I've lost my cursor. Here we go. She's put, I was literally just telling Warren about us getting smacked on the knuckles with a ruler. Yes, that was quite a common thing in schools to say back then. A ruler, but it was one thing with a ruler which was a bit flexible and was meant to be used flat, but then there was teachers that would use the edge of it because it hurt more, which again not acceptable. But it's when a teacher was using a completely solid wooden bar, even I knew that was beyond the bounds of regular punishment.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's interesting when you think about, because I was talking to somebody recently about, when corporal punishment was kind of outlawed, and rightly so. I don't think.
Yeah.
But I wonder, teachers weren't given the tool. They were told you can't cane children anymore, you can't smack children anymore, you can't do this, can't do that. But they weren't told what they could do. They weren't trained in how to do it properly.
No, it was just giving that transition, wasn't it?
And some people, I think, I was talking to somebody on my podcast recently. I can't remember who it was now, but they said that they went through a period. They went to school at that point in time, in probably the early 1980s, maybe, when corporal punishment was outlawed, and they said all the kids went feral because there was no control at all.
Yeah, because they could push boundaries, and there was no way of pushing back, no way of stopping them, and especially in some of the bigger cities as well, I think, and sort of the more urban areas where where children didn't have chance to get out in nature the same and let loose, and go into high-rise flats and TVs and gaming when that's all coming out, and then going to school and they just cooped up everywhere all the time, and it would just or the teacher would throw the blackboard rubber at you. They never missed. I've seen that a few times as well.
Yeah, I was in a class where that happened. My junior school, in fact, I went to a couple of junior schools, and I went to one, and the teacher, there's a Mr. Hodgson, his name was, and he said to me, he said, Frost, he said, I'm sure I talked to your father, and anyway, it turns out I went home, I said, said to my dad, did you ever teach called Mr. Hodgson? It was the same school my dad went to. And he said yes, and he was an old man, probably around about 60, which I don't think 60 is old now, but I did then. And he used to throw the blackboard rubber at people.
Yeah.
They weren't concentrating. Yeah.
I had a boyfriend when I was about 20, and he had a wonky eye. Right. And that was because a teacher had thrown a blackboard rubber not at him but at somebody else, missed the other person and got him in the eye, and it detached his retina, so he'd had to have an operation on his eye. So there's occasions when that went wrong as well. But no, I'm just going to throw him on this thing because my dad does watch these every week, and I don't usually mention him, bless him, but I'm going to give him a good hit tonight. But my father was one of those people that at school, like I said, he'd skip all his classes, he loved PE, but when he was given a choice of doing his homework or getting the cane, right, he actually made the choice to get the cane. Wow. He said, because to him, I could sit for 2 or 3 hours doing homework of an evening, or be outside playing for 2 and 3 hours, where the cane took a few seconds. He said, I'd rather just take a few seconds than spend 2 or 3 hours doing my homework.
Yeah, I've heard.
And him, the time was more punishment than having the cane, so he used to put up the cane or the slipper or whatever. Yeah. And he said the teacher hated it. He said, "Oh, you back again? You back again?" He said the teacher hated it, or the headmaster. They used to keep sending the headmaster. He said they hated it because he kept going back. He said, "But I just didn't want to do my homework. So I'd rather put up with that and then just go out and play."
Yeah.
And there are kids that would be like that. They're so resilient in that sense that actually even having a punishment, it's just like actually it's just another option rather than a punishment. And there, every child has that different mentality. And like you, my father was one of 6 as well, so he was but he was on the younger end of 6.
Right.
So he'd got older influences, probably learnt other ways to get out of things. But and it's every child is going to be their own individual personality and how they deal with life, with punishment, with culture, family, religion, school and education. And like some will follow all of that and actually follow it for life. Some will look at it and go, okay, I can see why my parents do, but it's not for me. Others will totally rebel, like completely rebel. And I think sometimes I've seen that more. And when you get successful parents, and especially when you get like vicars and police, sometimes their children can be extremely rebellious. And services, when you get children who've been brought up in a very strict environment, I've seen a lot of their children rebel over the years. And there's so many ways in which children will react. You can never tell them. They're all individual. But the most important thing is, I think, we've gone way over here again tonight. I'm just loving the conversation. This is brilliant. And I think the most important thing is us tonight. The whole purpose of this conversation is inspire the parents, the teenagers, the teachers, everybody involved in this network of bringing up our next generations to just get these conversations open. Not just say, oh, you're lucky, when we were little we would have been cane slippered, whatever. I mean, obviously their parents now are in that generation where they were sort of coming to the point they were the parents that were ruled out of corporal punishment. It's more the grandparents now that were on that level. But it's still important to share those stories, that it didn't kill us for who we were. It didn't destroy people. Some people's personality might have been a bit destroyed by it, but then so were children today with the personalities where they're getting bullied and nobody's being brought to justice for it. Children getting bullied and nobody's punishing them because they can't, or they don't have the strategy for dealing with it the same way. It's just getting all that conversation open and getting the
Yeah.
adults and the younger generation and the grandparents and the parents and teenagers, getting them all reconnected and getting those conversations going and getting them all open-minded and realise that it just working together through life is more important than all of the other stuff. Just sticking
Absolutely.
together.
You know, I
Uh,
think if there's one thing I would say to young people and parents and teachers is, I think encourage, if you're working with, I haven't got children, it never happened for me, but
okay.
nobody ever encouraged me to be myself. I had to discover that for myself,
Yeah.
and I think young people nowadays should be encouraged to be themselves, whatever that
Yeah.
is, whatever that.
Yeah.
Everyone has got their own unique talent, and they need to be encouraged to make that heart-shaped decision to be the person that they actually can be.
Yeah.
And that's what education needs to be around. That for me is what parenting needs to be around as well.
Yeah.
It's about,
Yeah.
I know your story with your, I've read your book and it's excellent.
Oh
And,
yes, thank you.
but
Yeah.
it's just about encouraging young people to be able to get the best out of themselves, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
and it took me a long time to realise that that was my responsibility in life. Now is to help facilitate that and help young people to get the best out of themselves and to have the confidence to make the heart-shaped decisions to actually be who they
Yeah.
really can be.
Yeah. And it's amazing actually because my son, I wanted him to be himself, but he was the opposite. He felt like he was the one that couldn't fit in, like he couldn't be himself. And it
Yeah.
was in his mindset that he was holding himself back a lot of the time as well.
Mm.
But it was when he learned to accept who he really was and
Yeah.
embrace that, that's when he really came out of his shell and
Mm.
his confidence grew. So
Yeah.
yeah, that can come on a completely different angle of it because being on the autistic spectrum and with the suicidal depression he was going through, that was a whole different story to what we're talking about with what you went through.
Yeah.
And I was desperately trying to find my son in this body that was lost
Mm.
there somewhere. So it was completely different again.
Yeah.
And he had a very different negative experience with school and education. To the point I ended up home educating him, but
Yeah.
it was quite a journey. So yeah, again, if anybody's ever watching this for the first time, Brain Unchained, the book that Graham's on about, Brain Unchained is available on Amazon. And I believe have you done any books?
I have actually.
You
I have
have one, haven't
actually.
you?
I've recently done a short ebook about heart-shaped decisions and how I came up with the idea of it. I did
Okay.
actually write. I did actually write a couple of books around my life story. One of them is still available on Kindle. It's called Growing Forward. You can get it on Kindle.
Growing forward.
I don't have any paper copies of it anymore. I need to get some more
That's
printed.
fine. I just thought what we'll do is we'll find a link and we'll put that in the chat. I'll just see very quickly if I can do that while we're on here, and then I won't have to go through. Because if I come off here and do it, I've got to go and post it everywhere individually. So we'll try and do it very quickly if I can. I've just got to find the Amazon link somewhere. And yes, so we are looking at. While I've got it there, what I'll do is very quickly pop up the Brain Unchained link first, which I'll probably pop in later anyway. That's the long link, not the short one.
Mm-hmm.
I could have found the shorter one. And then Growing Forward, Graham Frost. But no, I've absolutely loved having the one with the little arrows on it, green arrows.
Yes, that's the one.
Excellent, got it. All right, we will put the link to that in there as well then. Copy and paste right there. Actually, you might not see these on Facebook because it's showing me that they're posting on YouTube, so you might see these in the YouTube conversation, but I'll post them in the group and the page later on Facebook. But yeah, or you can follow the link from Facebook, and the links are on YouTube if you're watching this here and now. Just follow through to YouTube. Or just go and look on Amazon. Growing Forward with Graham Frost. Thank you. That's probably the easiest way. Just go and search on Amazon.
I guess, yeah. Mm.
But I've absolutely really, really loved having this conversation with you, to the point that I've not even gone, oh, it's 8 o'clock, we're just carrying on. But is there anything else you want to top up with, any other words of wisdom before we go?
No, I just think, I think one of the things that I've realised over the last, good night, Yvette. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
one of the things that I've actually realised is that, during my life, I've actually I've always said yes to opportunities. Um,
Yeah,
and I think, if
good
I,
one.
even when I've been scared, I mean, somebody said to me recently, can you work with a group? Can you work with an entire year group of year sevens in a school? And they're 11 and 12 years old. And I was like,
Wow.
I've never actually worked with year sevens before. And but I did it, and I came up with something completely new that I hadn't done for them because they have to engage, and it
Yeah.
worked. And it went really well. I've actually been asked to do something similar somewhere else.
Oh, it's fantastic. Well done. Amazing. Yeah, so always say yes. Yes, I've heard that one a lot this year. Always say yes. Yeah,
Especially if you're
that's a good
scared.
one. Yeah. If you say no, you've lost the opportunity. But if you say
Yeah.
yes, and then you can't do it, you can let go of it later down the line if you can't follow it through. But always say yes, and then figure out how you're going to do
Yeah.
it. That's the bit.
Yeah,
I love that. Yeah.
somebody said to me about 10 years ago, can you come and do a talk for a group of teenagers? And I said yes, and then thought, oh my God, I've got to tell my story to this huge group. There were 250 teenagers. But what happened after that event was that two of those young lads came up to me and said I'd inspired them. And that's what I do it for, because,
Wow. Yeah.
if I can inspire the next generation to do something special with their lives, then my
Yeah.
work is done.
Yeah. Well, let's hope tonight absolutely does inspire more people. We'll keep sharing the message. You can share the video afterwards, share it from YouTube or within Facebook, and can share it to any other social media from there. So thank you to Karen and Yvette for joining in the conversation tonight, and other random anonymous Facebook user there. It's also great. Thank you for joining in, and to anybody who's been watching in or catching us on replay. Honestly, it's absolutely a delight having you all here with us, and thank you so much to Graham. It has been a real pleasure having this conversation with you, and look forward to keeping in touch. So I'm sure we will be in touch a lot more.
Thank you
So
very much, Kay. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Bless you.
you're very welcome. Thank you. And yes, sorry, Yvette says night night to you both. So thank you ever so much. So I've done really well tonight, and now I'm going to have a coughing fit. But anyway, thank you so much, everybody, and we'll see you again next Tuesday. Next Tuesday will be. It will not be live next week. It will be the replay of the conversation I had with Jonathan Trowan the other week after I'd somehow confused myself and then recorded 2 hours early without him, and then we pre-recorded later that night for next week. So next week it won't be live, it'll be a replay, but I will put it on at the usual time at 7 o'clock to premiere on YouTube, spot on for 7 o'clock. So look forward to that conversation with Jonathan, and catch up on the previous one if you can from 3 weeks ago, to make it all make sense. And in the following week after that, I've got Chris Moon talking about that really is the power of positive thinking. There's no more ultimate positive thinking than what that gentleman can teach us that night. And following that, I've got Duncan Bascom Brown, Groggy to Great. So thank you ever so much, and we'll see you all again next week. Thank you so much, Graham, for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Kay. You're welcome. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.